All right, hey, good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Hope everyone is good. I am so pleased to see a full house here today. That means that everyone in this room is interested, invested in improving and understanding your organization's security posture, and that is a great thing for us all to understand and be in that mind space for. So congratulations on being here. I'm so happy to see you. My name is Randall Williams. I work on the secure software team with Esri development, and I also manage Esri's product security incident response team. So if you're reaching out to us via our trust.arcgis.com website, there's a good chance that you'll get a response back from me with regard to your security concerns. We'll discuss that a little bit more later towards the end of the presentation.
My name is Jeff Smith. I'm a product engineer on the ArcGIS Enterprise development team with a focus on security.
Awesome. Without further ado, we'll jump into it. All right. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about security best practices for ArcGIS Enterprise. ArcGIS Enterprise includes server and portal. We'll be discussing both of those aspects of the enterprise stack. We're going to start with talking a little bit about ArcGIS Server, portal for ArcGIS, and then we'll discuss some of the advanced options that are available from a security perspective in both of those aspects of ArcGIS Enterprise. We do strongly recommend some knowledge of ArcGIS Server and Portal for ArcGIS. When we say that this is an advanced class, we don't mean that it's a super duper advanced class, but it's also not a super duper beginning class. We do welcome any kinds of questions and comments. We may have some time towards the end of this presentation to entertain them live. If not, we'll be happy to discuss with you outside in the hallway or at the Enterprise Island back in the showcase, either one. I've got some business cards up front for you guys to grab whenever we get out, or at least I could pass out some emails because I don't know if I brought enough of them today. So moving on a little bit, we're all here because we understand that security is important. We've compiled a couple of different headlines from recent, just with issues of hackers getting involved, fines related to data breaches. Everyone heard about the Equifax issue that happened in down early last year or late last year, somewhere in there. And so this is something that's on our minds. This is something that's on our managers' minds. This is something that's on our IT department's minds. And so now it's something that we have, in the relatively recent future, as IT professionals, we're all kind of in the spot where we all have to be at least literate with regard to these types of questions that come in and how various vendors, Esri included, helps to empower you guys to address these issues that you might have, and questions that your governance organizations might have. So when we speak in terms of security, a lot of times we discuss this in terms of the defense in depth paradigm. Security plans have a lot of different layers associated with them. Even within Esri's products, within your GIS products, we all the time speak in terms of your data tier or your GIS tier or your web tier. All of those have different and distinct security considerations to move into. It even goes into layers outside of what we might consider to be our domain, like physical tiers and things like that. Those aren't things that we might not necessarily be discussing during the course of this conversation, but they're important to keep in mind as you work to facilitate some of these things, like little things like logical separation of duties and who you're allowing to access your servers and things like that. They're things that we don't think about initially, but they matter in the long term. So these types of security mechanisms, whether they're logical or physical or however it is that they might work out, they all help to increase the security of our system as a whole. And each one of these layers that participates in your security strategy is considered a kind of a piece of the puzzle, the whipped cream on the pie, if you will. So let's talk a little bit, just as a brief review of the on-premise solution for ArcGIS Enterprise. It's similar to the online solution. This discussion is going to be specific for an on-premises deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise. However, if you'd like, after the course of this presentation is over, you want to discuss some online aspects, we can go in that direction too. The thing that we talk about here when working with Portal on premises is an everywhere enablement, regardless of whether you're using a mobile client, a browser client, or or however you want to be going about doing that, using Portal as essentially the presentation and the security tier, since that's what we're doing whenever we have an ArcGIS Enterprise, is a delegated security functionality that moves over there to the Portal side. Back here in the back end, we have what really does the work, because up here is really just a website. That's all that Portal is really. Back here we have the worker process, and then your data tier kind of goes back behind here with your data store. We also tend to mash those up with online content and services that are provided by Esri to help simplify your life. Everybody's familiar with our options that we have out there from the online side. So behind the scenes, what do we have going on with ArcGIS Enterprise? Well, like we just discussed, we have the presentation tier and the security tier here at Portal for ArcGIS. We have ArcGIS Server, which also has its own unique aspects in security that goes on. And then we have our data tier over here with ArcGIS Data Store. What we're not really mentioning and what we're not really going into during the course of this presentation is your other enterprise databases that might participate in your system out here. But again, that's something that we can discuss, kind of outside of the scope of this conversation that we're having here. So what's our agenda for today? Well, first off, we're going to be talking about ArcGIS Server. We're going to talk about how to enable and how to use HTTPS, preferably HTTPS only. Keep in mind that here in the near future, I think it's with Chrome 53, is that right? That I forget something like that. In the very near future, in July, Chrome is going to be, it already flags forms on websites that are not HTTPS enabled, and it throws up a big warning saying that these aren't secure. It's going to be moving to flag all websites that aren't HTTPS enabled. So if you haven't moved in that direction to enabling HTTPS for whatever reason, honestly, I'd like to hear about the use cases behind it. I haven't seen a really strong reason for not requiring HTTPS, though I know a lot of customers and a lot of organizations do that. And I get it from an interoperability sense where you don't want to have issues with mixed content and things like that. But this is a direction that we really need to go kind of as an industry and continue to reinforce that idea of using not just HTTPS, but requiring HTTPS in your organization as opposed to any kind of plain text operations. We'll discuss the reasons a little bit behind doing that. We'll talk about disabling the services directory. People get a little bit scared whenever I mention that. It's not like we're turning off REST. That's not the option. It's kind of the HTML view of it. Restricting cross-domain requests, that goes into the concept of cross-origin resource sharing. Jeff's got a good demo that kind of discusses how that shakes out and what that really is. Restricting system folder permissions. This is a new one that we haven't brought into these types of discussions before. We'll talk about why restricting those permissions is a good idea. Disabling the primary site administrator account. And Jeff's got some tools, some Python tools that we can use to scan your ArcGIS Enterprise instances for best practices to make sure that somebody hasn't gone along behind you and kind of made some changes that may or may not impact your security, but at least it's something that you need to know about. After that, we'll jump into Portal, and then finally we'll go into the advanced options. I speak quickly, I understand that. Let me know if I need to slow it down and I'll happily accommodate. I just want to make sure that we get all this content in during the course of the hour that we have. Feel free to jump in with questions. Again, I'll try to answer them in line. If it turns into an in-depth response, then we'll just take it outside into the hallway and have a chat after the course of this presentation. So let's go. We're talking about the ArcGIS Server Administrator Directory. That's available at your machine on port 6443, ArcGIS/admin. You could also access that through the web adapter, but by default, if you remember, whenever you set up your enterprise instance, there's this little checkbox in there that says Enable Admin Access. If you don't want to expose that functionality, if you don't want to expose ArcGIS Server Manager, leave that checked off. It's okay to have it on a development instance. A lot of what we're talking about is what you want to do in best practices for your production instances that's out there. What the admin API does is it provides you a graphical user interface that allows you into the back end of the ArcGIS server site. And a lot of these settings that we're going to be talking about, we discuss here either in the security settings, and some of them are here under the Under the services settings, HTTP settings are defined under machines here. So just understand that if you're talking about working with non-GIS aspects of your GIS server, we're going to be working with them through the administrator directory here. So the first thing that we want to talk about doing is enabling HTTPS. Starting at ArcGIS Server 10.4, we set both HTTP and HTTPS enabled by default, and we ship a self-signed certificate with ArcGIS Server. HTTPS stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. And what, in a nutshell, HTTPS does is it prevents what's called a man-in-the-middle or an intercepting proxy. Sometimes that's abbreviated to MITM, right? Man-in-the-middle. And that's a proxy that a user or an attacker may set up between the client and the server that intercepts communication back and forth. If you're not using HTTPS, that communication that's going back and forth is in plain text, meaning that anyone can just pull out and read that information through a sniffer. If folks have worked with tech support or with something else using a tool like Fiddler, that kind of goes in between. Fiddler is in and of itself an intercepting proxy that has the ability to read into this. And you'll notice that when you use a tool like Fiddler and you open up a browser session with Fiddler running, you'll notice that it complains because the certificate that's being presented by the server and the certificate that's being used by the intercepting proxy have different names. And your browser is going to complain whenever there's a name differentiation because it believes that there's something that's spoofing that server name, that you should be aware of it. So this is the first thing that you should do whenever you're setting up your site, is encrypting traffic. And again, I recommend setting these to HTTPS only as opposed to HTTP and HTTPS. Again, I'm interested in hearing use cases where HTTP only is required. Hopefully that's not information where users are entering information in any kind of forms or anything like that. So again, it's enabled by default at 10.4. And you go into it to security config update, and we can set those options there to make that happen. Disable the services directory. I spoke to this a little bit previously, and sometimes people get a little bit confused about that. Oh, I don't want to disable my services directory. Well, here's the deal with that. So when you look at REST, people are mostly familiar with this HTML format that's going on in here. Your clients don't communicate with ArcGIS Server using HTML like that. Your clients connect and communicate with ArcGIS Server in a text format called JSON, right? So you can still view the JSON representation of your services directory, but we recommend disabling the HTML services directory on your production instances. Your development instances that aren't necessarily exposed, we understand that these are really handy tools for your developers to be using to explore your services. Why do we say, please disable your services directory? A lot of people don't understand the context behind why we would recommend doing that, why it occupies the second slide in my list here of stuff that we're covering. When you enable the services directory, when you have this HTML view, what you end up doing is, first off, you're allowing Google to crawl your site, right? So now Google knows a little bit about what's going on. That may be good, that may be bad. What it also does is not only is this a good tool for your developers to use, but it's also a great tool for a potential hacker to use to do reconnaissance against your site. And that's because a lot of times in there, you've got service names on each one of these layers that are in there. You might have layer descriptions and things like that that help someone who might have malicious ideas to build query strings, right, that they might not necessarily have an understanding for. When I'm using it, if I'm doing some pen testing and I'm working against a GIS server or something like that, the first thing that I do, especially if I'm not necessarily a malicious user that's familiar with ArcGIS Server, the first thing that I'm going to do is run an automated scan against it, and I'm going to take a catalog. I'm going to take an inventory of everything that I see in your services directory. Most of those forms, most of those automated scanners that are out there are looking to scrape off of HTML pages, but they're not necessarily looking to scrape from the JSON representation of it. So the amount of information that I'm able to get whenever I have the services directory disabled versus whenever I have it enabled is distinct and different, right? So if I have my services directory disabled it's considerably more difficult for me to understand what you have going on at the back end to perform that level of reconnaissance. Hackers by nature are kind of lazy. They want to use their automated tools to make these kinds of things happen on the fly. If the information that they want to exploit isn't immediately available for them, a lot of times they're going to move over to the next one where that information is immediately available for them. Your GIS instance and your services generally are going to be unique to your environment. Your layer names and things like that are going to be unique to your environment. So they have to customize creating these types of queries. So if you limit their ability to do this kind of reconnaissance against it, you effectively perform some level of security just in means of obfuscation. That doesn't take the place of securing your services in the first place to prevent someone from accessing it. That's an entirely different tier, but again, we're talking about defense in depth. Not only are we talking about securing your services, but we're also talking about obfuscating some of the facts that are available in your services once you've got them published. Cool. So when you do disable the services directory, when a user browses out to the f equals HTML services directory, you'll get a 403, a services directory is enabled. If instead you pass a parameter f for format equals JSON or PJSON, then you'll get the text representation of it back. So when we go to disable the services directory, in this case we actually go into the admin API, into the system tools, handlers. We go into the REST API, and there is a little checkbox in here. If we were to hit the edit button, we would uncheck the services directory, hit the save button, and that's it as far as disabling that services directory goes. There is a help topic on there for it, and we also include it in our best practices for portal and server security. So again, there's our little checkbox that we can speak to that performs that operation for us. I'm going to let Jeff speak to cross-domain CORS requests here. He's got a really great demo that we can speak to.
Okay, thanks, Randall.
Yeah.
Now, another option from the ArcGIS Server Administrator directory that you saw underneath the Disable the Services directory is for the allowed origins. And this relates to the restricting cross-domain requests. Now, these requests, these are called CORS requests, or cross-origin resource sharing. These are used primarily by JavaScript applications, and it's a common method used to make these types of cross-domain. It's a common method used when a post request is made to a resource on another domain. So the diagram that I've got here on the slide will make it a little bit easier to understand. So in the purple box is the client web browser, and it's accessing a JavaScript web application, what I've got there on the green box. Now inside that JavaScript web application is a reference to an ArcGIS server service. Now the service resides on another machine potentially. And this request to the service on the other machine is considered a cross-domain request. Now, if this request happens to be a post request, it's going to fall in line, and it has to be a CORS request, as we've identified here. So, within the ArcGIS Server Administrator directory, we can restrict which origins or which web applications are allowed to make these types of CORS requests. And so by default, when you install ArcGIS Server, it's open to everything. We've got a little, I don't have it up there, but there's a little asterisk, so the allowed origins available for everyone. And so you can restrict it if you know the specific applications that are going to be accessing your services. You can put the allowed origins parameter in there, and you can restrict which applications can make these CORS requests. Now bear in mind, what I've highlighted in here, this does not restrict overall access to the web services. This only restricts the CORS requests to these services. And sometimes that can be a little confusing, because you think, okay, well, I don't want this application on, website XYZ to be able to access any of my services. The restriction that you're putting in here is only applies to CORS requests. There are other requests that can be made that sort of circumvent these type of CORS requests, and you could still access the service. So just to keep in mind. But let me give you a demo to kind of help you understand here. So what I've got here is, let me go to my services directory. And I'm going to use Fiddler to capture the traffic. Let's see where I'm trying to. It doesn't want to move. There we are. Okay. So this Colorado feature service, right now, I will access that service. Let's capture the traffic here. And all I want to do is open it in ArcGIS Online Map Viewer. And you recall the way I've got currently my allowed origins configuration is what I had in the slide, where it's allowed for HTTPS www.arcgis.com. In this case, I'm accessing it through HTTP www.arcgis.com. And this is exactly why I get this error right here on the window. It says, I mean, clearly I can see the service, I can access the service, but editing is disabled because CORS requests to the service are disabled. And you can kind of see this in the Fiddler traffic. I don't have the filters. I've got the filters mixed up here, so we don't see it. But there's a, let me show you an example here. So all I need to do, if you recall what I had in the ArcGIS, the restrictions that I had in there were for HTTPS www.arcgis.com. So if I change this URL to HTTPS and refresh it, then the feature service appears and the edit button appears. And what's going on behind the scenes is when the map viewer accesses the service, it makes this REST info request. And here's the origin header to determine if CORS is allowed or not. And in the response, if these two response headers are included, that means CORS is allowed, and that's how the map viewer knows that CORS is supported here, and it enables the edit button. All right, Randall, back to you.
Cool. So, the takeaway from that is that now you know that when we're working with clients like that, especially with ArcGIS Online, it's making a post request to a resource that's on the server, and if the post request comes back with the allowed origin, if the response to that comes back and the origin header matches one of the origins that's allowed in our allowed CORS settings, then that tells us that the CORS requests are allowed. CORS requests are allowed are required in order to make those types of edits over a post in ArcGIS Online. So it's a cool feature, and it works really great with JavaScript applications. It doesn't necessarily take the place of securing your services, but it does provide some level of validation as far as which domains are able to access your web services. So this is the new one that we haven't really discussed that much during the course of this presentation, but we chatted about it and felt like I've seen enough of these just in kind of random Google searches. So a lot of times folks will do some troubleshooting. You'll run into an error message or something like that. You're trying to publish from ArcMap, and for whatever reason, you get an HTTP 403 response, access is denied, and it's got something to do with your publishing tools. You'll get an error message that says the publishing tools aren't accessible. Sometimes you make the assumption that it's got something to do with your security settings, so you go over here into ArcGIS Server Manager, and you set your system tools to public, and then you forget about it, and then you leave it. And maybe it fixes stuff, maybe it doesn't fix stuff, but you still have these system tools that are set to public. By default, these are privileged tools. We set them to private, only to specific users. Those users are going to be members of the administrative group or members of the publishers group that have access to be able to use these publishing tools. These publishing tools are powerful. They manage your caching. They manage publishing your resources. They manage getting information strings and things like that that are associated with your services. So you want to go through and kind of verify your system folder permissions are limited to administrators and publishers only. If you wanted to, you could hop on Google right now and go out to your public REST instance, ArcGIS, whatever your host is, whatever your context is, /webadapter/REST services system. And if you find them in Google, then they're not secured. The thing is that, yeah, seriously. The thing is that what you're doing is maybe not, again, you have to know a little bit about ArcGIS Server to go into the background, but if you lock those down, you're preventing the potential of somebody abusing your server with resource consumption, maybe deleting your services, maybe publishing stuff that you didn't want them to publish, maybe filling up your entire hard drive with a giant cache that they kicked off because they were able to do that from your services directory. So keep in mind, disable these. I've actually gone through and done some Google searches and made some friends, made some not so friends by going out and contacting some of these organizations directly. Some people get a little weirded out when random people contact their IT department and say, hey, you might want to keep these kind of on the lockdown, but I'm doing it from a good place, right? Yeah. Anyway. Disabling the primary site administrator account. This is a concept that carries over from a lot of different organizations here. This kind of goes right on top of Microsoft's best practices for doing things like disabling the default account on your Active Directory called administrator, creating a different account, and then assigning administrator credentials to that account. So if we disable the primary site administrator account, you kind of put yourself in alignment with general best practices there. And that way, our personal preference for an enterprise organization is to use something like an Active Directory hook using WebTier or something like that, where you're using Windows users and roles. Use one of your Windows users so that you have Active Directory governing how your policies are defined as far as that goes, and then disabling your primary site administrator account. We can do that just by going in here into the services directory, into the disable button under PSA. We can re-enable that too with the, there's a batch file that allows you to enable and disable and add users and things like that. I think it's the update password.bat file down in the ArcGIS Server tools directory.
It's the password reset.
Password reset. And there's a -E flag that you can add at the end of it. And the -E flag will re-enable that primary site administrator account. And you would do that, say, if someone left the organization, they were your only administrator, you had already disabled this primary site administrator account, and that user was deleted out of your Active Directory. Someone needs to take over that responsibility, so you could just re-enable it back again. But again, it's considered best practice, and we didn't make that one up. That comes as a kind of standard industry thing as far as like disabling your default administrator users. Jeff's got another great demo here regarding scanning ArcGIS Server for security checks. I'm going to let him speak to that as well.
All right, thanks, Randall. Yeah. This script is installed with ArcGIS Server by default, and it's a Python script. It does a quick scan, about 12 items or so that it checks to see, and gives you a nice report in HTML format. It categorizes the findings based on severity, 3 levels, either critical, important, or recommended. And certainly the critical ones should be taken a look at and addressed as quickly, or in most cases as quickly as possible. The important ones and the recommended ones is a little bit to your organization's discretion as to their relevance, but from our perspective, the important ones should be addressed as well. So let me give you a little quick demo of that. In the ArcGIS Server Administrator directory, where the installation, not the administrator directory, but where the ArcGIS Server was installed, under Tools and Admin, there are a couple of Python scripts in here. The one that I'm talking about is called Server Scan. So if I go out to the command line here, Python server scan. And then in this case, I'm going to scan my own system. You can use this script to scan other ArcGIS server systems if you want to. I'll take my own system. And it will create the report. You can have the report written to any directory of your choosing. I'll choose the default here. And it's a quick scan. Requires that I type in the correct password. That should be, oh yeah, no. No, it doesn't want to.
To show us that reset password.
Yes. Exactly. Oh, okay. Well, I think I know what the password is.
Are you using site admin or? I don't know if you had it. If it was. Yay.
Yeah, that looks a little better. That's what I get for changing the password.
So if these outputs come in HTML files. If you wanted to, you could change that directory there, push it into a virtual directory, and now you can access it over over your network or whatever, and you could have a little bit of a higher level of accountability.
So as I said, you've got they're sorted based on severity, and each of the findings, it does give you a link to the help doc if you're not sure how to address it or what the what it actually found. You can click on the help link. For example, disabling the REST services directory, as Randall has discussed here. If you click on more information, it will take you to our help doc as to exactly how to go about doing that. So, all right, let's go. Okay.
Cool. All right. So let's move on to the portal side, where things are similar but different. So here, again, I'm not going to get into the guts of what HTTPS is and what it's not and all those other kind of things. Again, at the portal tier, we have in the security tab under My Organization for edit settings, you can set this to allow access to the portal through HTTPS only. And that will, it'll prevent users from gaining access or adding content that's not HTTPS enabled with your GIS server. You'll want to configure this both at the GIS server tier and the web tier. Remember, we're talking about two different tiers, and Portal requires the web adapter to be out there in front of it. So if you're going to require access through HTTPS only, make sure that you also have HTTPS only set at the web tier. Disabling the portal directory. We refer to this as the sharing API a lot of times. It's a back-end way that kind of represents all the operations that you're doing within the front end of ArcGIS. So it's the API access into the back end of Portal for ArcGIS. Again, you'd want to disable the sharing API for the same reason why you'd want to disable it from the services directory from the ArcGIS server side. If you've ever captured any of your traffic going back and forth from working with ArcGIS Online, and you see the www.arcgisonline/sharing/rest/ some other resource, and you attempt to visit that resource over HTML, you'll see that we've actually disabled that in ArcGIS Online as well. However, similar to ArcGIS Server, if you pass the f equals JSON parameter, then you'll see again the text listing of everything that's happened out there. So again, it helps to for a couple of different instances. It reduces the chance that your items are going to be browsed and crawled, and that it's going to be found in a web search, queried through HTML forms. And I'll be straight up, we're not perfect in terms of a lot of these things. We've caught a lot of different issues that are related to these forms that are in these APIs that are out there, but occasionally a cross-site scripting issue will sneak in. And if you don't have an HTML representation of these APIs, you're not going to be able to execute a JavaScript or a malicious HTML or something like that you add in cross-site scripting. If you want to talk about those types of things later on, that's something that we can certainly discuss, but it's a little bit outside the scope of this conversation in terms of like exploitation techniques and things like that. Again, whenever you disable the services directory, if you look at it from an intercepting proxy, you'll get that HTTP 403, which means access denied. This is all you see whenever you disable it, just basically a link to the API reference that's out there. So how to disable the services directory? In this case, as opposed to just having a checkbox that we work from in Portal Admin, it's actually one of the system properties that we can apply. There's a number of different system properties that we can use whenever we go to update the services directory. In this case, we're just adding this one little option here, disable services directory, and setting that value to true, and that'll help you with disabling that. This is all pretty well documented out there for in our help documentation for it. Did you have a demo for this one, or is this okay.
Just describing.
Okay. So when we're talking about restricting machine access in Portal, Portal uses a number of different proxy calls to get around issues related to, sometimes related to CORS issues, sometimes related to passing security calls and things like that. So Portal for ArcGIS has a number of different proxies that are running in the background for it. By default, we leave these wide open for the same reason why we leave those CORS settings wide open. And that's because Esri cannot, out of the box, proactively know which resources you want accessing your server, right? I mean, if your intention is to have a GIS server or a portal where you're serving up content publicly, then you might not necessarily want to restrict some of these settings that are out there. That's sort of like how we have ArcGIS Online base maps scoped, right? So we don't want to limit CORS headers against ArcGIS Online because we don't know who's going to be consuming those services, so we can't shut the door on anybody. You have that kind of granular control over your in-house portal because it's yours and you own it. So it is possible out of the box for someone to potentially abuse the portal for ArcGIS proxy. What I'm thinking is that maybe someone constructs a URL pointing to the proxy, and then after the proxy URL, you point to, say, www.randallsawesomewebsite.com or something like that. What you're doing is you're abusing the trust relationship that your users have with the brand name of your portal that's out there, and then redirecting them somewhere that they might not have intended to go to in the first place. So if you restrict your proxy settings, that forces the proxy to only work against specific machines and specific clients that you want to allow to do that. Like, say you're ingesting some OGC resources from some third-party provider or something like that, and you know that you want to allow those to be able to proxy in, but you don't want to allow others. So you can kind of go in there and get granular as far as who is allowed to use the portal proxy and who's not allowed to use the portal proxy. And that kind of helps to reduce any kind of what they would call unvalidated redirects. In this case, we do allow you to validate your own redirects, because again, we don't want to, out of the box, set that restriction for you because we can't know ahead of times. So it works for the proxy would be used for systems that aren't using CORS. By the way, there's a great website out there called enablecors.org. If you don't know if you have CORS enabled on your web server, I'd say 80% of our production web servers, according to our telemetry, are CORS enabled, but there's another 20% of them that aren't. So you can go through and enable that if you'd like to. And that's where we would use this proxy is OGC, non-CORS systems, and if I'm working with, if I have my own ArcGIS server and I have that secured with token-based authentication or otherwise, you know how you can go into ArcGIS Online and add a service to it, and if it's secured, you get the option to save those credentials with it. That's what we do is we create a proxy on the back end that passes those credentials into your service so that you don't have to manually enter those every single time that you go to enter ArcGIS Online. So that's what you're doing when you're saving those credentials, is using the portal's proxy. That's exactly what we just spoke to. How do we go about restricting proxies? Again, we can go into the security configuration like we were in before. Allowed proxy hosts is the option that you want to use here. And this will accept a wildcard here. I don't know that the CORS settings accepts wildcard.
No.
CORS settings don't, but the allowed proxy hosts, if I want to allow everyone on the arcgis.com domain to be able to use my portal's proxy, then I can be explicit with regard to that, or I can get really granular as to the fully qualified domain name that I might want to use. Does that make sense? I blew through that, so I want to make sure that we can all get that. Cool. Okay. Disabling the create an account on the sign-in page. We get this a lot for secured organizations that want to have granular control over who is allowed to access the portal and who is not. By default, again, since we're inheriting a lot of this code from ArcGIS Online, we kind of follow their model with the expectation that you might want to allow people to subscribe to your portal You can either allow or disallow that operation if that's what you want. A lot of people look at this in terms of licensing. You know, if you don't want people to be able to create their own account within your portal and eat up a seat license, you can prevent them from doing that. And instead, what you can go about doing is pre-populating those accounts. There's a number of different options depending upon the security tier that you're using for pre-creating accounts or for manually creating those accounts rather than for allowing that kind of self-service option out there for creating new accounts from the user perspective there. Again, we would go into My Organization, edit settings, the same tab that we were specifying HTTPS only. We can check or uncheck the allow users to create new built-in accounts there. I think Jeff's got another demo here speaking to CORS requests in Portal.
Thanks, Randall. I don't have a demo about this, but that's okay. This is the same, what I just discussed about it from the ArcGIS server perspective. The same can be applied for Portal for ArcGIS as well. So in this case, instead of going through the administrator directory to specify the allowed origins, you can do it directly through the Portal for ArcGIS home application. And you do it, what we've got here under Organization, Secure, Edit Settings, Security. You can list the specific domains there. Now, a very similar security feature is related to trusted servers. So with CORS, you're controlling third-party applications that can access your services or your portal items. For trusted services, it's sort of the reverse direction. You're making a CORS request from your own Portal for ArcGIS map or web app outbound to a map service that requires web tier authentication. In that case, it's a CORS request and credentials need to be included with that. By default, credentials are not included, and so you're going to get, for security reasons, you wouldn't want your credentials to be automatically sent out to any CORS request, excuse me, outbound CORS request from a web map. So you need to specify, okay, this server I trust, I want my users that are accessing my map. If a request is made, a CORS request is made to this service, credentials will be automatically included. I've got a little diagram here that kind of shows what I'm referring to. In this case, since the service is secured with web tier authentication, the internal proxy can't make a request directly to it and pass the credentials. And so the browser needs to make a CORS request to it with credentials included in it. And so I've got a little demo here that I can show you. In this case, let me go back here, and I will log in to my map. And I've got a feature service that uses web tier authentication that's hosted on another portal right now. So if I go into a map and add this, the behavior that we see here is going to be very similar to what I demonstrated with the CORS. We add the layer. It's a feature service. It will display, but it will indicate that its editing is disabled. So we can see it there, but the editing button is disabled. So if I turn around and go to My Organization, and under Edit Settings, Security, Trusted Servers. Where are the trusted servers? There it is. And in this case, I just need the machine name. I add that, save it, and now if I just reopen that same map where I was accessing that feature service, you'll notice that the edit button now appears, and that's enabled. And that's because that feature service is secured with web tier authentication, and it's allowing my browser to automatically send credentials to that feature service to authenticate.
Very good. Cool. Appreciate that, Jeff.
Oh, let me continue. I'll go on here. I apologize. Another option is the allow portal access. This is particularly helpful when you're working with two portals and you've got a map on one portal accessing a secured service or an item, a secured item on another portal. And if they're both using SAML authentication, this allow portal access comes into play. So I'll give you I'll show you just a quick slide, just what I was referring to here. If you've got your own portal uses SAML and you're trying to access an item on another portal also using SAML, the allow portal access allows the authentication mechanism to appear on the screen for users. So I'll give you a quick demo of this as well. I've got, let me get a new map. And I've got a service here on another portal secured with SAML. I just want to add that feature service to my map. Right now, when I add it, I get this pop-up. Now this is great if all your users are built-in accounts, this is fine, you can put it in that account. But if you're using enterprise accounts, you can't put in your enterprise credentials right here. It's not going to work. So let me cancel that and go to my organization. Edit settings, security, and under allow portal access, again, all I need is the portal name. I add the portal, I save it, and let me go, and I'm going to create a new map here because I'm sure that's been cached. So when I add that same layer, I now get prompted, and it was supposed to, well, okay. Leave it to let me clear my cache. No, it didn't accept my parameters. So, but what that's the intention here, and I don't know what's going on with the demo, but the intention is you'll get the login window on that portal, and you can select whether you want to log in with an enterprise account or a built-in account. No, that shouldn't matter. I don't know. I may have something.
Is it because we specified the prefix to it? Does it matter?
No, that's fine. So I'm not sure why it's. I need to go the opposite direction. That's what it is. I specified I've got my web app on this portal is trying to access the other one. I need to log into the other portal and say, okay, allow access for web apps on my own portal to do that. So I did it in the reverse direction, but that's ultimately what's going to happen. And I'd redo the demo, but unfortunately we're running a little low on time here. Yeah. The other thing that I want to show is we include in, similar to server, in portal, we've got the security scans or the security checks. It's another Python script that can be run very similarly. Everything's categorized based on severity. So if I do a quick demo of this, this is under the portal installation directory, under tools, and in this case there's a security folder. And there's only one script in here. So if I run this one, same thing, you can run it against your the own server or other servers. You've got to type in the correct username and password, like I failed to do in my previous demo. But and this will generate. When it's done, it gives you a little, says it found 5 security items. It gives you the location of where the HTML file's stored. Open this up, and very similar to the portal for the ArcGIS server scan report, this one has lists the items and links to the help doc for each one of those items. All right.
All right, cool. So now let's jump into our advanced topics here. Try to burn through these, but I want to make sure that we cover them. SSL protocols for server and portal, Cipher suites for encrypting communication, and securely transmitting ArcGIS tokens. This gets a little bit granular into the options that we have available with ArcGIS Server and Portal for ArcGIS. So starting at 10.4, how many of you have requirements for PCI? Anybody doing PCI compliance, anything like that? Okay, so this is going to be important for you to understand. PCI requires that certain ciphers be disabled, certain TLS versions be disabled. I think that it's TLS 1.1 and 1.2 is what's required at this point. Starting at 10.4, SSL v3 is dead. So SSL, nobody should be using SSL v3 at all. Everyone should at least be using TLS, preferably 1.1 or 1.2. We still allow TLS 1.0, but you can go into the admin API and disable TLS 1.0 if that's what you like. You can disable TLS 1.1 also. I wouldn't disable TLS 1.2 because that's the best we've got right now until TLS 1.3 becomes more ubiquitous in use. So essentially what we're doing here is we're preventing the use of some of these weaker cipher suites. Cipher suites are encryption algorithms that are used to encrypt that data as it's going across the wire. The stronger the cipher suite, the longer it takes for a machine to decrypt that. TLS 1.2, I think it's like 10,000 years or something like that with the strongest computer that exists currently. But what is it, Moore's Law or something like that, where computing power doubles every 1.5 years or something like that. So we could see the potential in the future for that threshold to go down there. Highly aware, highly security credentials and issues like that, move to TLS 1.2 that's highly recommended. I can talk about some use cases where some customers might not want to move to a level of TLS 1.2, and that's usually because older clients are in place, GPS receivers and things like that, maybe old phones or something that don't support newer versions of TLS. Older versions of ArcGIS Server, we can go in and kind of hack that out and make changes, but understand that that because of the version of Java that's used in the older versions of ArcGIS Enterprise, you may have trouble using newer cipher suites and newer protocols. That's one reason amongst a slew of reasons why we're going to continue to beat the drum of keeping your software up to date. So TLS and its predecessor, that's what they do is encrypt communication going across the wire there. So we can go into here. We document this pretty well as far as which ones that we support and which ones we don't. You can go into the admin API and in both the portal and the GIS server and configure which versions of TLS you want to use as well as which cipher suites that you want to use. By default, we don't include some of the weaker cipher suites, but again, because of older clients, you may need to add these back into there. Again, your security posture is only as good as the functionality of the application that you're serving up. If you make your application, if you make your GIS so secure that it passes an audit, but nobody can use it, what good is it? So seriously, there's a balance there. There's a sweet spot between making sure that you have security and making sure that your people are able to actually use the solution that you're providing. So you may need to, I guess what I'm saying is you may need to add some of these back into there so that you don't break functionality that somebody else is relying on. Securely transmitting ArcGIS tokens. This is a new one, and it is documented at 10.5 and 10.6. We added this X authorization request header for tokens, and basically what we're doing is we're putting this bearer token in the headers of the request rather than the way it was kind of done classically by passing the token within the GET request as a query parameter. The security scanners that do these kinds of things a lot of times will flag tokens in a GET request as a potential security violation because they don't have the context to understand exactly how the token itself is scoped to specific IP addresses and specific refers. So adding this header in there keeps those types of scanners from being able to easily discover your tokens that are out there. Patch updates, notifications. Again, in my spot, I get a lot of people who complain who are using older versions of ArcGIS Server who find a security issue and who want to get that one security issue fixed. To me, that's short-sighted. I'll be honest. It's hard for me to validate and to appreciate someone's request for a single security-related hotfix against an older version of the software, when it's highly likely that we fixed not just that security-related issue, but a whole slew of other ones in a newer version of the software. I guess it's short-sighted to go and say, I want to fix for one issue so I can check off a checkbox without also addressing the other security issues that are going to be endemic to your software. Why fix one when you can fix them all, right? So this update tool will reach out there. It'll see, hey, wait a minute, I've got a security patch rather than just a onesie-twosie fix. How about if I apply all these patches to your machine? When we release these patches, we do it against the latest dot release in a series. So 10.2.2, 10.3.1, 10.5.1, 10.6 is out now. We'll be releasing some security patches later on this year, maybe next year, something like that. And those will be against 10.6.1 unless something really hairy comes out and we need to address it in our current build there. So that's important to understand, that we have a handy-dandy option that will allow you to reach out and understand if we have patches that are available for you, rather than having to go out and into the sites and find it out. And finally, something that's near and dear to my heart here, the security findings. These days, a lot of organizations are going through and either hiring independent assessors or doing security validation themselves in-house. When they do that, usually they will come to the administrator, to the GIS administrator, or to your boss, and they'll have a big stack of paper like that big, or a giant report that they're going to plunk on your desk, and they're going to say, how are you going to fix all these issues? Esri has a product security incident response team. I run it. If you reach out and you click this report a security concern button, my team gets an email from you saying, I have questions about this, that, and the other. Frequently, users have questions about some of the third-party components that we leverage in our software, questions about compliance, questions about our stance on specific security types of things. And we encourage that type of dialogue. And it's our mission to not only get back to you within a business day of you reporting this type of concern, but we also shepherd that through the course of the lifetime with documentation and kind of leaning on development in order to work together. Jeff and I work very closely together in this respect in terms of how we provide this type of service. If you call up tech support and request that to have someone involved in a security issue, a lot of times they're going to point you over here to this site, and that's because I spent 10 years myself in technical support as a lead, and kind of requested that support services tend to push those types of issues and funnel them through my PCERT team. So we'll address any kind of questions regarding vulnerabilities, stuff that might not necessarily be ArcGIS specific, like suspicious emails that you get with that were sent from Esri's, phishing, spam, stuff like that. I have a relationship with corporate security in order to help those types of issues. Privacy and compliance issues, if you have questions about how we engage with GDPR, how we handle HIPAA, those types of things, we're happy to help address some of those compliance and policy type questions that aren't necessarily technically related. And finally, really for any of your other security, privacy, or compliance related concerns. If you have a question on how to set up some sort of security, support will be happy to help you. If you find a vulnerability or compliance, something kind of niche that requires an industry-specific solution that's less of a tech support, how do I go about doing this type of issue, and more of I have a real issue that I need to get by in order to ensure compliance with some type of regulation, hit me up. We'll be happy to help out with that. So with that, please take our survey. Let us know how we did. Let us know how we can improve. We appreciate the feedback, and again, we appreciate you being here because security is something that's important to all of us. Thanks, y'all.